Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to come out today to what Annabelle and I thought for a long time is a fascinating book and also a fascinating experience to have the author of the book here. Paul Kirillis, Chopin's Piano. Now, I could introduce it in a very strange way, and Paul looked at me a little bit, not certain, but then he realized what I was saying. And I said, this book, it has nothing to do with Chopin, nothing to do with pianos, but it has to do everything with life, with history, with music composition, the process of the composition, musical interpretation, strange and powerful personalities in the world of music, and of course, it has to do about Chopin and Chopin's piano. But it is a book that delves into just about every aspect of the life of music. And that's what makes it so fascinating, because it isn't just sitting down and reading about Chopin's piano. Thanks very much. Got a lot of pianos, and he played them very nice. Okay, next.
That sounds like a great book.
So this is what me and I were saying. We have to bring Paul here, and we have to have also one of our members of our jury, Bryce Morrison, who really, really knows his stuff, because not only he's a very good pianist, not only he is a fantastic teacher, but also he's an extensive author on all things musical. So combine the two things together, that leaves me out of what the hell am I doing here? The answer is this: I'm ready and I love it.
Yep. Can I just start with a little footnote, as it were? When Annabelle and Andrew asked me to talk to Paul, I thought about this quite wonderful and very, very challenging book. I felt very flattered by this. I just wanted to sort of think, well, what are my qualifications to talk about Chopin to Paul, who's written a book that is so sharp and perceptive and explodes so many myths about Chopin? I'd like to say that I studied with the pianist Alexander Yuninsky in America for 3 years, and I mention that because Yuninsky was a great Chopin pianist who won the Chopin Prize in Warsaw in 1932. So I took advantage, as well as playing a lot of other music with him, I did a lot of Chopin with him, and that was, my whole attitude to Chopin was really, I think, very different after that. I remember learning at least 12 of the mazurkas and so on, which I've often called Chopin's confessional diary. Everything is in there. Also, more subjective than that, I'd like to say that Chopin used to walk past my flat in London, where I live, on the way to have dinner with some friends in Bryanston Square. And I think of this dapper little figure, perfectly dressed. He was a bit of a dandy with clothes, beautiful silk top hat, white kid gloves, and trousers cut in the English style, otherwise one isn't in good taste, he said. And as Paul mentions there, a very particular cologne he wore. I didn't know about that. He had a particular taste in cologne. Of course, in those days, people wore rather excessive amounts of perfume and cologne to cover up less socially acceptable smells, really. But still, so I really, Chopin has always been someone like a spirit, really. I could never think of him as a person at all. It's too overwhelming. He's been with me all my life. The first record I ever owned as a child was a Chopin recital by Louis Kempner, a famous pianist at the time. So, this book, as Andrew's just said, is so challenging because one of the many wonderful things about it is it sets music in a context. All the time, Paul is talking about social movements, what audiences were like at the time, what the times were like, how this affected Chopin, and changing styles of performance, and above all, literature, the endless references to literature. Sometimes one seems to live in a world where people are pianists, they play the piano and have very little knowledge outside, anything outside, and it reflects in their playing. No real sense of conscious. So I was so conscious of this. He explodes so many endlessly repeated legends about romantic legends about Chopin, and it's very sharp away. So he's saying to you really, who was Chopin? I mean, for example, you know who Liszt is. Liszt is very public about himself. Chopin remains a very, very elusive figure in many ways, I think. When you think of Clara Schumann talking about Liszt, he does not always behave the way he should. There's too much of the tinsel and the drama about him, she said. You wouldn't have said that about Chopin. Chopin was a very refined notion of social behavior and so on. So, I think, Paul, can I start by asking you, I mean, first of all, the first thing that catches your eye with your book is Chopin's piano. Not Chopin, like, for example, the more recent biography of Chopin, very long, very detailed biography by Alan Walker. It isn't like that. It's taking another angle altogether. This is a book with a twist, to use a current expression. Many twists. Every page is like a twist, taking you away from the conventional view of Chopin at all. So, Chopin's piano, I think it would be true to say, Paul, that in your book, surely the piano in a sense becomes Chopin eventually. I feel that with it very much. After all, you're talking about the central crux of your argument as regards his works, the 24 preludes, because he composed these in Majorca, many of them. And so this becomes, the piano almost becomes Chopin in it. Such a special piano. I mean, you quote at one point a musical which I saw when I was a teenager called Salad Days, which is a very innocent sort of thing that wouldn't go down at all now, with the song in it. We're looking for a piano. What? Any old piano? No, the one that makes you dance, goes the song. Very naive sort of musical and so on. But Chopin's piano, this also, but I think that's such a clever parallel, it's pretty very witty parallel. Chopin's piano was so special. This is the thread that unites so many elements of your book together, doesn't it?
Yes, and of course I sought this piano. You know, I started this book by thinking, okay, how do I find this piano? And in doing so, it will tell us something about the music. And in that, one of the characters in the second half of the book, which I'm sure we'll get onto, is Wanda Landowska, the great Polish harpsichordist. But she thought that in finding these instruments, and at a time when it wasn't actually fashionable to collect early keyboard instruments, that you would somehow get closer to the music. And she, of course, was one of the great architects of what we'd call today historically informed performance. So it seemed to me that in trying to find the piano on which Chopin wrote probably 11 of the preludes in this terrible winter in Majorca in 1838 to 1839, that would somehow get to know a little bit more about the man and the music. And we really do, because we all know that Chopin was a great improviser, wrote his music on the piano, spent a long time then trying to get it down on paper and make sure that he could retain that original spirit. But it meant, therefore, that he was very much hostage to the instrument on which he wrote. And if you take that as a given, and that this very, very primitive instrument that he had on hand in Majorca in 1838, you start to say, well, let's work backwards from the DNA of the preludes and see what that tells us about the piano. And it's really, really possible to do so.
Absolutely. I think there's so much detail in the book about pianos, quite simply, how they've developed and evolved. What was Chopin's piano actually like? It's a radically different instrument to anything you would say today. And this is very interesting because you quote at one point, Paul, Stephen Huff saying, I thought Chopin could have played a modern instrument. I mean, the action is so tough as opposed to the very lighter action of piano. I mean, Chopin would have not been able to play a modern instrument successfully. I was just talking to Paul earlier about something Alicia de la Roche, a very great Spanish pianist, said to me once. She said, you know, trying to play Ondine of Ravel, triple piano or whatever at the beginning, on a modern instrument, it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. It can sound like a fire alarm instead of a water nymph, sort of kind of cascading water. It's very difficult to do. And so pianos are, again, well, I was talking to you about the Australian pianist Eileen Joyce. There's a scale in her record of the Four Impromptu which is so rapid that a friend of mine said to me once, I didn't even do metal. Even then pianos were different. That's in the 1940s. Much lighter action. Very difficult to do metal on a modern piano. So there's a tremendous sense throughout the book of how instruments have changed. And therefore the character of the piano player, everything's changed, hasn't it?
Yeah, everything changed. Well, it's a great moment when it changes, and I'm very fond of beautiful instruments like the one behind us. But in 1859, Steinway patents the iron frame with the cross-strung layout, and it's that moment where pianos start to really kind of stretch their skins, and then pianists, of course, try and match this greater scale. And of course, you've got the explosion in the building of concert halls throughout Europe. So as music moves out of the salon that Chopin so admired and loved, and in which he felt so comfortable, moving into these much larger concert halls that you start seeing from the 1850s in particular. So of course, the instruments had to fill the space. The pianists had to fill the instrument, and so straight away this amazing divergence from the way that Chopin had conceived this music takes place. So there are some kind of really strange mileposts, and one of them is that Chopin dies in 1849, just at the time where these concert halls start to appear, where the traditions that Liszt enables from the 1830s onwards start to be replicated by his students. When Anton Rubinstein starts to sort of change the way that people think about these early, very miniature works of Chopin, all of these things start happening in the decades following on from Chopin's death.
It is so brilliantly clarified in your book, that change. I mean, imagine the change from a salon to the Albert Hall in London, where people give solo recitals in there. You need a massive instrument to project in that sort of space and so on. Can I just say something to you more about Chopin's, going to the actual music now, the sheer audacity of Chopin. Everything was so, what he did, I was talking to particularly, one thing one always hones in on, and Chopin's most audacious utterances, that's so far removed from that sort of popular image of him as a salon composer. My God, if anyone was less a salon composer, he wrote with a daring that shocked people tremendously. So the finale of the Funeral March Sonata, which people have described as like a wind whistling across a graveyard, or a network of rooks in the twilight, but Chopin said, I've composed such a funny little finale, two voices chattering together in unison. He didn't go in for fancy poetic talk, he let the music speak for itself. But that writing, I mean, Mendelssohn said, as music, I hate it, I abhor it. That sort of showing of emotional force like that was extremely disturbing to a much more bourgeois type of mentality. I think Schumann was upset by that.
Schumann definitely
Schumann was upset. Yeah. But Schumann was a wonderful music critic, apart from being a great composer. But this baffled him.
That's the thing, it was a bafflement. And even when he was writing about the preludes, when they were first published in Germany in 1839, 1840, and he writes about how he was hoping for something more along the line of the etudes, and he didn't know, he was just completely befuddled by these tiny miniatures. And what on earth was Chopin doing with these little fragments, Schumann called them, almost fragments, unfinished sketches, and didn't understand the audacity of the writing, and grappled with it, and was very honest about it, just essentially, I don't know what it is, and of course, Chopin didn't return the compliment. He was completely uninterested in Schumann's music, which seems amazing today, to be a composer of that stature. And just to go, no, I'm very, very much interested in Bach. I'm interested, of course, in Mozart, but then anything that's happened since then, not so much.
Yes, Chopin, I mean, you may think the music is absolutely sublime, and obviously indeed it is, but there's often a great division between who someone is and what they actually write as a novelist or poet or a composer. Chopin was bitingly sarcastic. He could be very mean-spirited sounding indeed. There's a bit about Liszt, a letter that he wrote, which is really savage. I mean, people in the 19th century didn't mince their words, and they said very nasty things about each other. And about Schumann, of course, with his famous remark, hats off, gentleman, a genius, about Chopin, Chopin said, oh, listen to Schumann chattering his nonsense away. Schumann and Chopin, the great co-romanticists, got very little change out of Chopin. Yeah. They worshipped him. He didn't worship in return at all. No.
And he had a very similar comment. I mean, the letter, the thing that's fantastic about Chopin is that his letters are just so witty, so sort of, he's just this funny man with this biting sense of humour. But he at one point talks about Liszt. Liszt writes this approving, but with a slight barb, review of a performance of a handful of the Preludes when they were performed in 1841. And he just says, oh, Liszt has deigned to give me a seat at his table, and so it is. It's kind of funny that those are competitive when kind of Chopin just had no interest really in the music that they were interested in.
No, what does it say in this letter about this? It ends after very sarcastically. It says, look, between us, Montfort and Quack, which was he said loudly in the letter, the man's a complete ass. He has no creative ability at all. He puts other people's music in his bar, because that's operatic paraphrases and so on. Chopin was died far too young to have heard say the big minor sonata was a great master. I think he probably hated it anyway. So you couldn't win with that at all. But the letters are, I agree, they're extremely witty, but at other people's expense most of the time. His comments on what the English audiences were like that you go into and what the Paris audience. And Scotland, my God, the scorn knows no limit to the sort of people he saw there. And he says, oh, the young pianists played for me there, and they played the wrong notes so soulfully, so beautifully. He's bitingly sarcastic.
Yes, they look at their hands to solve the as they play all the wrong notes.
One interjection here, something that somehow frightens me, what you actually said, how the actual instrument influences the way, or not only the music is played, but potentially the way the music was composed.
Sure. Because
then, that brings the next question. If one says, let's listen to something which is historically informed, it's not good to listen to this colossal, beautiful monsters. You have to listen to an attack or to a play, which you can hardly hear it if it's not played loud.
Yeah.
So in other words, is there a kind of a distortion? That's the way Chopin listened to it, and that's the way he could listen to it, because that's the way the piano was. So now, if it is played faster, louder, and stronger, well, I'm not quite sure if that changes the music.
Look, I think a number of traditions developed in the wake of Liszt, then Rubinstein, Anton Rubinstein's pupils, and that this became very, very, almost cemented into place in the 20th century. And that's why, like Richter in 1979 in Japan, does this series, it does this recital with a series of the preludes, I think about 10 of them. And they're so distinct and so beautiful and so slow. The lovely little A major waltz, he adds a beat to every phrase. And so it just kind of sits in the air and then off. And that was Richter saying, oh, I want to recapture some of the spontaneity that Chopin had and all of his peers identified when he was playing. He gave the impression that he was just plucking this idea from the air and then it was improvised and then off he went. So Richter was playing on, whether it was his Yamaha Grand or whatever he was playing on as he went from town to town. But what he did manage to do, even though it was on a new instrument that was tuned in equal temperament and all these things that were so different from what Chopin dealt with, he still managed to get the essence, and the essence was this idea of spontaneity and improvisation, which he thought had been lost in a century or 80 years of playing. So, if you play those, there's a lovely collection of composer instruments. I mean, Hatchland's which is a National Trust property in the south of England, and they're kept racehorse fit. You know, they're really good instruments, and you know they have a Chopin broadwood, a Chopin Pléiade, a Chopin Era, and you know you can play them, and the sound world, the touch, everything about them is distinct. I think they're tuned in equal temperament. Yes, they are. So you know that's different. But yeah, so you can recapture it. But I think the onus is to be like Richter in '79 and just to say, okay, we're dealing with these beautiful instruments in much bigger spaces. How do we honour the spirit of Chopin? And you know that's incumbent on all pianists today.
Because that raises a very big issue, and I mean, the way, if you think of ferociously powerful works by Chopin, which are extremely violent, emotional, and so on, like the B minor scherzo, or say the octave etude, listening to music like that on a small instrument, and we hear them now in this huge and thunderous brilliance and force, strength. It's just a radically different listening experience altogether, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we listen entirely differently. I can't imagine what Chopin would have thought if he listened and he'd heard his music played by a great pianist like whatever. I mean, it's just a radically different experience. Everyone has to realise how totally different it was. It's very interesting when you say, well, nevertheless, you're talking about Richter, and Richter's playing on a modern instrument, but nevertheless attempting to capture the essence of Chopin somehow. No, I quite agree with that. But
this brings us something to reflect a great deal in the book, and that is the way in which Chopin went on to be performed. So I will start by a very stupid question. Suppose we had an original recording by Chopin. Okay, so we could hear the man actually interpreting and playing his work. Would it matter if he then proceeded to listen to, let's say, Polini playing Chopin in a very different way and structure? In a sense, the interpretation now belongs to the interpreter, but not to the composer.
Yeah,
I would say Chopin would never do that.
Yeah, and there's something wrong with that whole, you know, Chopin would never have done that sort of line of thought. Yet, it became more important in the 1870s, and Macaulay was, you know, one of his, you know, not necessarily the best pianist who was a student of Chopin, but he was certainly, you know, a very esteemed pedagogue and then editor. You know, he starts editing these Chopin editions in the 1870s and trying to remember everything that Chopin had ever said to him in lessons and trying to put all these details into the way that we would interpret music. And this, I think, became really important because in the 1870s, Chopin has been hijacked, if you like, by the Anton Rubinstein school of thinking about the music. And so it just seemed urgent for anyone that had any connection with Chopin to somehow say, this tradition that has developed is really different from the tradition that Chopin, you know, the path that Chopin was on. That we then have to work out whether it matters that it's different. I'm delighted that there are pianists like this and pianists who have gone in certain directions, but you know, it is, we have to recognise so markedly different from what Chopin was.
You quote for one when George Sand will come and say this remarkable lady, you know, delicate, frail, sensitive, and the title of a fairly recent record by Luganski of Chopin, My Poor Sick Angel, it's called. So this image of this frail, sick man, and when you're talking about how, you know, if you could hear Chopin play now, you'd say, that's how it goes. But interpretation evolves all the time into something radically different from what it was even a few years ago. I was just quoting the other day, Mark Pariah, a wonderful pianist of today's generation, saying, I listen all the time to the older pianists. I listen to Courteau, to Schnabel, to Edwin Fischer. I don't play like that now, because I'm of another generation. But I like to think I continue their spirit. And that's a very nice remark, that. I think it's a very modest one in a way, and he's a wonderful musician, I think. And, but there is a complete change. And then you hear someone like Ashkenazi say, we used to be a composer's masters. Now we are his servants. Well, you can be both, can't you? I think you can be a master of a pianist who is also properly responsive to what you feel a composer wants from you.
Yeah, I absolutely think that. We had a little chat before about Artur Rubinstein, and it's interesting. I'm trying to answer your question, Andrew, and it's unanswerable.
Yes, it's a difficult one.
With Busoni, we can look at the piano rolls. Rachmaninoff was what we know the early recordings, and so we actually have some kind of skeletal understanding of how these people played, even if the technology somehow let them down, and all these kind of things. But they're frozen in time. We have this snapshot of a particular way of thinking about performance, and with Chopin that's much harder. Except that because all these emerging performance traditions, which were so gargantuan, and the best way to think about that is, of course, Chopin would never have performed. Well, we know Chopin didn't perform all 24 preludes, but by the 1870s, this was becoming more and more prevalent because the whole romantic narrative was to try and make something big out of these inexplicable, tiny little miniatures that Schumann himself found so difficult. So there were people that were doing that, and one of the great and interesting pianists of the early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century, was Kozlowski, who was a pupil of a grand pupil, of Chopin, and of course that's interesting because he just in the age of electric recordings did record all the preludes and did a very, very beautiful performance which was recorded in 1949, so the 100-year anniversary of Chopin's death. And that's very, very subtle, intimate playing. And of course, Rubinstein hated it. Rubinstein thought that Koszalski was just a complete fraud. Whatever. There were no plays like this in the age of large halls and the romantic narrative that turns into the 20th century in the face of modern.
Well, that is not partly answering Andrew's question, Paul, I think. I mean, Arthur Rubinstein, for many people, the greatest Chopin pianist, when he first played Chopin, people said, well, I don't like that. It's extremely cold. They've been used to a much more free, rhapsodic sort of tradition from a pianist like Paderewski, for example, with desynchronization of the hands for expressive effect. Rubinstein people said, oh, he's very good at Spanish music, he plays Albani's wonderfully, but Chopin, forget it. Because it was another approach. It was very patrician. He saw Chopin as a very masculine figure, a very patrician figure, nothing to do with the salon type of thing. So there was a big revolution coming from Arthur Rubinstein.
Yes, there was. And firstly, I also think that the idea of the salon composer is a misnomer, because if you think of who was at those salons, the great intellectual thinkers and writers and painters and musicians of the time were there talking about ideas. And there's this lovely quote that I use where all the people are there and they're all chatting and talking and arguing and drinking and having their hot chocolate and all the rest of it. And then it's at that moment that the great Chopin sits down at the piano and starts to improvise. And all of these amazing conversations are happening, but what they're all waiting for is when Chopin will finally sit down and play, and then Chopin will play for 2 hours, and it's music improvised of the most astonishing caliber. So there is that. And the thing I like about Rubinstein, Arthur Rubinstein, is as you say, this patrician figure. He had no truck with the idea that Chopin was this sickly little individual, and that the music was somehow a feat. And so he thought that it had to stress the big bones of it. But that kind of, even though I'm really sympathetic to that because it is accurate about Chopin's health, it did put him at loggerheads with people like Koszalski.
Absolutely. Barenboim made a very interesting comment about Rubinstein Chopin. He said, Rubinstein discovered the spine in Chopin. It's perfectly structured sense. He also then said, Cortot discovered the opium in Chopin, the narcotic quality. I understand that.
That's
very receptive.
Really great. I wish I had had that when I wrote it.
Yeah, exactly. We wish we would have said that. That's
Thanks,
very
Brian.
good.
With these wonderful quill pens and Chopin sitting there, this amazing instrument playing away. Because in the film leading up to that, George Sand says, "You could write miracles." No, kiss me, George. You could write miracles of music in Mallorca. and the next scene, there they are in Mallorca in this great palace, and it's really kind of wonderful. And George Sand is this ghastly, bitchy character. So it was again this, that's how history and men treated her, for hundreds of years. But the reality is the dissolution of the monasteries, which occurred in Spain in 1835, 36, meant that this beautiful monastery at the top of the hill above Palma was suddenly available. So they ended up in this apartment there. And the village is so small, it's not like being down in Palma where at least they could hide with some anonymity. Everyone knows everyone's business. And George Sand and her two children, not in school. It was terrible. And even if you go to the monastery today, it's cold. The Fountain Monastery is cold. It's the wind that goes through the streets is cold. So it was really hard. Chopin was very, very sick. Yet, all of these things, suddenly they leave because Sand, says, look, if we stayed a moment longer, we would have died of frustration or rage because of their relation with the villagers. But Chopin finishes this collection of preludes that he'd been working on probably from 1835. He finishes a ballade, a couple of scherzi. George Sand revises one of her books and writes various bits of journalism. So it was an incredibly productive time. And of course, Chopin said to Liszt, whether this is true, because their relationship breaks down by the early 1840s. He would often say that was the happiest period in my life. So I think that it was terrible. He was sick. It really was the coldest winter that Mallorca had seen for decades. So it was very unlucky. Yet it was the early months of his relationship with George Sand. It was very productive in terms of what they achieved, and he recovered.
People made fun, didn't they, or quote off these two. I mean, you quote Oscar Wilde saying, well, she had love affairs in order to write about them, which is a pretty Oscar Wilde remark, extremely sarcastic. And then what Henry James having a go is all saying, oh, she was, reconstructive, very fanciful. She sort of reinterpreted everything that wasn't the truth at all about it all. And then there's one you quote about someone saying, oh, Chopin and George Sand frolicking together in Venice, something to remark about them together.
Yeah,
so they were a very shocking couple, weren't they?
Yeah, well, because each of those examples is in the 20th century.
Exactly.
The last one is the Cole Porter song. And you just think, wow, well, these are amazingly iconic figures if they can still capture the imagination in the 20th century, or in Oscar Wilde's case, very late 19th. Especially given what Wilde's getting up to. It seems that this is pretty mild cheese.
Yes. Given the importance of the preludes, because they are quintessential here, and the piano and the preludes go things together, and given that you write extensively, deeply, literally, that I couldn't follow, I couldn't understand. So I'm going to simplify, not my question, simplify my understanding of that. You've left there beautiful expression that preludes are signposts, not a direction. It is a sign for something. Now, when does a prelude stop being a prelude? In other words, if you tell me, here is the 25-minute prelude, I would say it sounds like a little bit of an Irish-Polish joke. How long is a prelude a prelude? When does it stop being a prelude and it becomes a ballad? Other than I say, it is my 25-minute prelude and it is my 1.5-minute ballad.
Well, that's stupid. The 1.5-minute ballad. But the 25-minute prelude is not, funnily enough. And I think the moment in which it changes is in this collection, the Opus 28. Because, of course, we remember what preluding was. The cult of the virtuoso improviser was so great that those who couldn't improvise, this is in the 1820s and 1830s, felt a bit embarrassed. And so you'd see these collections of published preludes, which are really pretty ordinary. And it really is just a way establishing the key and the tonality, and then off you go with this piece. But it would also mean that that person could pretend that they were this great improvising pianist. So preludes were very modest. Their aim was simply to clear the air, to set things up for what was to come, and that was it. That's their function. And then you get Chopin saying, okay, that simple idea I want to turn into almost a genre in its own right, and that's what he does in these years. And then, of course, it's not that it happens a lot in the 19th century, but some of the great collections of preludes that followed these, Szymanowski, Debussy, Scriabin, so he did actually do something. So I think the 25-minute prelude is possible. I mean, the longest of the preludes is probably the so-called raindrop, 5.5 minutes or 5 minutes or so, but and then down to 35 seconds or something.
It is an absolute revolution, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a revolutionary gesture by Chopin. Which might, I mean, a prelude leads to something else, doesn't it? So preludes and fugue, but Chopin's don't. They're completely self-contained after consisting themselves.
And we know that he conceived them that way because we have evidence that he started writing them in 1835, 1836. He knew the harmonic plan that he wanted to follow, which is the starting in C, then the relative minor, then jumping a fifth relative minor, going all the way through. So they're different from Bach. So he knew that, even though he wrote them out of sequence, and so there was never going to be a fugue to follow, even though he loved the Bach preludes and fugues, loved the idea of fugue. That's the revolution, where he just said, I'm going to take these simple things that are just meant to be throat clearers and turn them into pieces in their own right.
The revolution, too, brought in the astonishing mood swings of them. If you think of the opening one, which is like a sort of curtain raiser at the beginning, and then you come to something amazing, straight away, number 2 in A minor, which must be one of the most morbid pieces ever written. I know it's very interesting that if you listen to many, many recordings of that, it's not lento, very so like something actually crawling morbidly with extreme dissonance that must have really startled everyone at the time. And people don't play lento. They sort of hygienically cleanse it, and so you hear people playing a sort of roughly andante. It has to be lento to capture this. Before the next prelude, he breaks out into the sunshine. So you've got all these conflicting, violently conflicting moods. Encouraging people, incidentally, well, of course, to give titles. Yes, but no, quite. So, Cortot liked to give titles to them. The Road to the Abyss, that's number 16.
Yeah.
But you think, no, Chopin never did that. So Chopin did not, unlike Liszt, for example, the music spoke for itself. There weren't titles at all. People made them up like the Minute Waltz or the Revolutionary Etude or whatever. He didn't do that at all.
And you wouldn't just have titles, you'd sometimes get really detailed descriptions, bar by bar, of what's going on.
Yes.
And I can't remember who said that it takes longer to read these descriptions than to play some of the
Yes. Usually it's about exactly what's happening emotionally and in every way. You think, well, really, it's just, what's it, James Hornig, I think he says, the G minor ballad of Chopin, he says, the tender lily drips in cadenced monotone, and I see the slender hip girl with the midnight blue eyes. My readers may well be aghast at what I see, and indeed we are. It's quite extraordinary. Chopin would have been horrified.
And we know he was horrified because he hated the English editions of his works, where editors would suddenly say, the cow who ate the horse or whatever there was a title for a piece. And he'd just go, and he would fume, and he would just say, why do the English insist on giving these ridiculous poetic outpourings to my works?
So best that the publisher didn't do the publisher's style.
Yeah, he thought that the English was just a very sentimental audience, and it needed that little kind of...
To go to a salon to a completely non-blind, I have no idea where the quotation came from, if it is a tribute to Chopin. He was being asked why, let's say, the music of the beginning part of the Moonlight Sonata is sad. Was there something emotionally involved? And he says, no, possibly the daughter had a sick family. Absolutely. You wrote the side piece.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, I think Chopin would be very sympathetic with what Mendelssohn once said. Music is not too vague for language, it is too precise for language. That's a very loaded remark by Mendelssohn, that. It goes beyond language.
Yes, because
we
know
a feeling expression.
Yeah, we know that because Georges Sand writes her memoir Histoire de ma vie in 1852, so just a few years after Chopin dies, and she's really great in this book. She's really, really good. She doesn't devote a lot of pages to Chopin, but the pages that she does devote are really illustrative and on a couple of things. The huge regard that they had for each other, the way that Chopin went about composing and then revising and revising and revising. And then the third thing was where she talks about getting into the cart from Valdemosa to go down to Parma to try and get the French piano out of customs once it finally arrived. And that she arrives back, of course, there's a huge storm and there are mudslides. And she hears Chopin playing number 15 of the Preludes, and just said, but can't you hear that each drop is being replicated in that ostinato, the A-flat ostinato, and he got so cross with her, because I said, no, you can't, music is not simply about, replicating, as something, something from nature. And she said, the thing that Chopin did was to kind of filter these sounds and turn them, transform them into something so sort of amazing. So I like her writing there.
Well, she's a writer, and she's using language.
Yeah.
She's using sound. That's the difference there. There's that description of that journey in your book. I just wanted to say about George Sand, again, going back, this is a very odd relationship. I think, would you say, she was a very motherly figure to him in a way. You made remark on one that she was a sexually rapacious woman.
Yes.
Chopin was, I think, somewhat indifferent, as it were, in that line. So it was a very strange relationship, and finally, of course, it broke down. But I think you're all saying so wonderfully in the book, without her, he'd never have survived. People say she killed him off, but without her, he wouldn't have survived as long as he did. She was there to support him. His genius, which she was very aware of.
She was an absolute force of nature.
Absolutely.
And of course, when the relationship does break down, finally and tragically, she writes this impassioned letter to a friend of hers, where she just said, for 8 years I've lived as a virgin, because very, very soon in their relationship, probably even by the time of Majorca, the idea that they should have an ongoing sexual relationship was anathema. And so Chopin, the superstitious Catholic Pole, just sort of went, okay. And I think the roles did very much emerge, that she was his carer and mother, and he was just another child for her to look after, almost this genius, brilliant child, who needed caring for, and the room and space and love in which to be able to write these works of genius.
Oh, you said something about the process of composition by Chopin, and superficially, we have some facsimiles of the teams and some working copies of that. And of course, there's a mass of corrections, subtractions, deletions. The guy really worked extremely hard. So the perception of the composer sitting down, taking a deep breath, and resting away is completely false. It is really hard graft.
Yeah, it's hard graft. It's really hard graft. And Georges Sand writes about this, incredibly beautifully. But so it's both true and untrue, because of course Chopin, composed so much at the keyboard, and then what Sand writes about is, the weeks, often weeks it would take just to try and be able to recapture the stuff that he did so instinctively, and these beautiful improvisations. I write about the artist Delacroix, who thought that sometimes the improvisations were more dramatic and more adventurous than the final version of the work. And that really worried Delacroix. He tried to work out how these things of genius were sometimes watered down a bit. And I think that's to do with the idea of structure. And even Delacroix said the same thing. Delacroix said, well, after all, a building needs to be contained within a frame. and Chopin had to find his frame for these amazing improvisations.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of both of it, actually. The idea that he could actually just kind of do things, but then had to kind of really recapture them. And the difference, of course, is between the fair copies of all of Chopin's works, which even they have scribbles out, scribblings out.
And isn't it true that the same thing also pertains to Mozart, who also was prolific, but also really accurate very hard.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of Beethoven's, 11 notebooks, and absolutely jam-packed with effort. It just doesn't come out.
Yeah, it doesn't just come out.
Again, well, George Sand is very sympathetic about that, and she writes very beautifully about what hard work it was. She watched his mind working to get the form he wanted to express the extraordinary and completely revolutionary ideas.
Yeah.
And she, again, I mean, all this sort of image of George Sand as a complete horror, I mean, quite the opposite in many ways. As I say, you wouldn't survive without her help and so on. Can we move on a bit to audiences? You talk later on a lot about what's happened in Paris, the sort of audiences there, later in Scotland and so on. And you're sort of thinking, as I was reading this, you know, the conditions of concert giving there, it's extraordinary, the whole world, and a radically different thing altogether. I mean, for example, you read about Liszt pushing his carriage through the snow to give a recital because it got stuck. You're talking about the mudslide in New York and so on. The conditions are just awful. Can you imagine? I mean, it wasn't sitting in a comfortable plane, arriving somewhere, going to a nice restaurant in this concert hall. And the conditions, the actual concerts themselves. I remember one describing a concert. You tend to give concerts with other people. You had a singer and a violinist and a pianist. Listed one, and there was a singer who sang something called "'Tis the Indian Drum," and another song called "When Thy Bosom," and he would sort of fill in between of things. So we don't do that sort of thing now at all. The idea of these perfectly awful sounding songs, and there he was. Or, for example, when Liszt played in Ireland, the audience stood up on chairs to see whether he had 20 fingers. They'd been told he had 20 fingers rather than 10. They're very disappointed to find he had 10. And one of them, when he played La Campanella, they said, you know, will you ring the bell again, Paddy? They shouted at him. So audiences weren't very sophisticated in those days. And it's all very different now. And I think the things you describe here about audiences in Paris and so on, very social. I mean, constantly had very much social occasions for one to indulge in. There was a period to see who was there and who one might have a drink with and sort of thing. You know, it was all, the music came was very secondary.
And also the length, they could run easily with 3, 4, 5
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's all of these things. This is what I found so fascinating about it, is that all of these things are changing in the latter part of Chopin's lifetime. And the idea of the recital, which, you know, Liszt, of course, christens that, if you like, in 1839, where he gives what's called a recital, you know, for the first time. So all of these changes are occurring in piano technology, in style, in the concept of you know, the length of a recital. And you know, suddenly it's just a sole instrumentalist rather than, you know, a whole circus of them. So it's happening, everything's being telescoped, and it's been telescoped at such a fast pace that by the time you get to the early 20th century, Chopin is now this incredibly important figure in the history of Romanticism, which he would have been, you know, incredibly surprised at the time, because he was writing such individual works that were beyond easy classification.
Yeah. I could and say, well, it just reminds me, I knew the American pianist Eugene Liszt very well. He became a sort of American uncle to me. I used to stay in New York. And he said to me one day, he was trying to get a decent agent in New York. And he went along, and this man said, so, what do you do with it? And he said, well, I'm a pianist. Yeah? Well, what else do you do? So, I mean, do the dancing girls come on at some point? And he said, no, I just give her a sign. And man, oh, no way, well. So you see, the habits, so that's in the place. This is the idea of a solo recital by one person seemingly is still to certain people as a rather strange idea. I mean, who's going to come and listen to that? Where's the you know, the good bit and so on? You know? the bit that isn't boring, you know, so it's quite Amazing, isn't it? And Liszt, of course, playing with his profile to the audience, and playing, of course, from memory. He was accused of being a giant show-off. I mean, to do that. That's a revolutionary idea again, that you should actually play without the music. I have to say it's been a curse on all pianists ever since. If you're scared about memory, which when I was playing quite a lot, it was something I'd always really very scared about. I thought, you've got to get from one end of this very large piece to the other. That's the thing. I can play it, but I'm going to have one of those awful memory crashes and so on, which is complete. The rapidity of change is so extreme.
And that's also why the piano, this small little humble piano on which Chopin worked in Mallorca, it amazes me that it survived. It amazes me that someone hadn't found it as a relic in the later part of the 19th century by which time Chopin was actually very famous.
Which brings us to the more or less the point of the book, where is the pivotal point where everything radiates.
Well, yeah, the piano. Well, buy the book. That's what I'd suggest. What happens is, of course, Wanda Landowska, as a great Pole, visits Mallorca in 1911, and because she also is a grand pupil of Chopin, makes a pilgrimage up to Valdemossa, where, of course, she knew Chopin and Josant had lived for those months. And is absolutely overwhelmed to find that this small little piano is still there and hadn't been touched for 70 years. And so eventually she negotiates to buy it, and so she takes it with her back to Berlin, where she lives, and that's where we have photographs. That's where the proper and beautiful photographs are taken of it by a very young Alexander Binder, who would become a very famous, almost society portrait photographer in the 1920s. And so he takes these beautiful photos in 1913 of Landowska in front of this gorgeous little piano. And so, finally, after 70 years of complete, no one had ever thought of it. Whereas, of course, other people had really thought about very famous pianos owned by Chopin and had collected them. So we're very lucky that Landowska finds this instrument and takes it with her. But of course, then she leaves Berlin, she goes to Paris, she builds a concert hall in a small villa that she buys in Saint-Louis-la-Forêt in the north of Paris. And there starts putting in place lots of historical instruments. Because Landowska, as I said a moment ago, she's at the beginning of what we think of in terms of historically informed performance. She is wanting to kind of collect these instruments to unlock aspects of the composer's either style or thinking and creative project, if you like. So she's really great and slightly ahead of her time on this. And then, of course, the piano's there when in 1940 the Nazis march into Paris, and they know about this instrument because Hitler, of course, had given instructions that cultural artifacts of great importance were to be found and confiscated. He didn't care who owned them. There needed to be no recompense. And so, they knew about Chopin's piano, and they were looking for it, and then found it, and looted it along with, Landowska's collection of instruments, so 10,000 books in her library, everything. So it's amazing that the Germans by this stage had completely appropriated Chopin. And there's this line by Schenker, the great theorist, where he kind of says in the 1930s, sorry, I stopped doing that, 1930s, for the profundity with which Chopin thinks and writes, he belongs more naturally to Germany than to Poland. And that was their thinking, because of course they hated, they were destroying Poland. In 1939, even some of the Polish libraries, they just burned rather than collected these great priceless books.
So it was forbidden to play Chopin, wasn't it, Paul? Because it would stir up nationalist feeling and so on. It's quite a comment on the sheer power of Chopin's, the Polishness for the Polish people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can I just say that one of the extraordinary things in this book, we don't have to talk about that, is it leads to this long section about London and Gloucester. And that was one of the most eye-opening things for me. I mean, it was a surprising twist to me, because if you're going to talk about some shop, I would have thought at the end, initially, well, I was going to end with a long discussion about Arthur Rubinstein or something. But no, you choose Landowska, who was, of course, you have to remember, a very, very fine pianist.
She's really
wonderful pianist. I listened to a recording of Mozart's sonatas, who was a pianist, and then went on to become one of the great instrumentalists, one of the great harpsichordists of all time. And you're talking about the whole business of the recreative spirit which she had with the bands, and of course her feeling for authenticity and so on. And then the comments you quote about Chopin. You know, what would I do without Chopin? She said, he is, you know, has been everything to me. So it fits in wonderfully, but very daringly, I think, your long section on Landowska.
Yeah, and it's a conceit in some senses, because it's just that it was Landowska who found the piano and not Rubinstein. So
yes.
But because she was this grand pupil, because she's Polish, because she feels this great sense of nationhood, because Poland in the 20th century was under Russian rule until 1918, in the same way that it was under Russian rule in Chopin's time. So there are all sorts of parallels. And then, of course, you know, for whatever reason, as she marches, she gets out of France and you know, builds a completely new life for herself in America from 1941 onwards, and has an amazingly productive 15, 16 years. And also transforms the culture, as great emigres always do, transforms the culture of the host country. So it became a really interesting story, and a way, a vehicle, if you will, for me to look at how the Chopin revolution continued well into the 20th century, and certainly as long as the history of this particular piano that I was tracing.
I was reading a review of the Landowska recital by Virgil Thompson.
Oh yes.
Most waspish and savage of critics, but just saying, this is the most wonderful thing ever. I mean, this was the man who said of Mara Hess, late in her life, when the playing became a little bit not quite so what it was before, of course, he said, she is not memorable like a love affair. She is sensible like a well-tailored suit. Poor Jim, imagine having that said about the Landowska, just totally overwhelmed by her.
Yeah, completely.
Quite wonderful,
And yes, Harold Schonberg wrote a really beautiful obituary of her in 1959, and where he just talked about some of the town hall performances that Landowska gave on harpsichord when she arrived there in 1941, and then she did the Goldbergs, the first complete edition performance of the Goldbergs on harpsichord for 100 years, it said. And then she recorded all the 48 preludes and fugues. And that was a joy for me to go back to them, because I'd kind of heard some of them as a student, and I kind of thought, like, everyone thought about Georges Sand, she was a bit of a crank. And when you go back and hear those early piano performances, you hear the well-tempered clavier, you just go, wow, she was a serious musician, and not simply, and she's a comic character as well. And you kind of think, speaking of waspish characters, Ralph Kirkpatrick writes about going and having lessons with Landowska in Saint-Loup in the 1930s.
That reminds me of what it's about, you play Bach your way, I'll play in his way.
It's Casals. Yeah.
Yes.
But that became this kind of thing that haunted her. Everyone just was saying, well, what a haughty person you are. But they just disagreed on ornamentation, and in a nice kind of smiley way, she just said to him, yeah, you play Bach your way, I'll play his way.
Yeah, it's good wrong.
Yeah, it's good wrong. And I don't think she was very funny. She was kind of a very serious character. Although she just said at the end of her life, rather beautifully, she said, people always try to peg me, I'm a romantic, or I'm a Russian, I'm a Jew, or a Pole, or I'm a French person, or I'm this. She said, all I am is a simple Jewish person, crazy about music. That's all I am. And she turned that into this, astonishingly important career.
And then she said, I never practice, I always play.
Yes.
I like that remark.
Yeah, that's really
Never
true.
practice. It's like, that is, I mean, it's like Neuhaus, the great Russian teacher. I never play unmusically. When you do scales and things, always musical. Otherwise, you're going to have to play mechanically.
Yeah.
So, no, I mean, you always play. You never practice. She said, that's a nice remark.
No, it's a great remark. No, so she I really liked kind of being surprised by it and then getting to write about it. And then also, because of course she never returns to Paris. She makes such a success of her life in New York. She never sees the Chopin piano again. She never sees the other instruments that are recovered after the war from salt mines, from monasteries, from her player harpsichord. One of them was recovered from a Nazi officer's recreation hall. The Monuments Men is actually a documentary. It's not a Hollywood film. They really did kind of find these instruments in the most unusual places, and they were restituted as best they could be, which was just they were returned to point of confiscation. And of course that was of no use to Landowska. So but the piano, the Bowser piano, made by Juan Bowser, existed certainly in 1954. But the great Chopin scholar, Jean-Jacques Ageldinger, goes there as a young boy. He goes there while he was a teenager. He goes to visit the house in 1958, and sees that some of the instruments are back in Saint-Lô in the concert hall, but the small pianino on which Chopin wrote the preludes is not there. And so that's where the mystery, that's where the trail goes a little bit cold.
I don't know how we are with time. Can I just ask one last thing? I'm curious, when I'm talking about modern performances of Chopin, and there's one bit, I was actually at this concert you as Bellini played, and there's a pretty stringent comment on Bellini's. What you're saying, the point which I understand this perfectly, was a deep, depressing experience. I think Bellini was a very great pianist when young, within his own very distinctive terms. But, people can go on playing it too long. And, there's a sense of sheer tiredness, particularly the lyrical preludes, so blank. And there's a very fine recording of them early in his career, but then he recorded them again, and he really backs it. And you're talking about that. And you're saying, isn't it amazing where the audience packed out, you see, because everybody knows this is the greatest pianist in the world, you see. So they're all there, and they scream the place down at the end with applause. So no one's listening, they're just listening to an image of success, rather than to the actual play itself. This is a very common thing.
Yeah, I think it is, and I too found that concert so interesting. And I was there with my editor, who's an amazingly musical man, and he was looking afterwards at the audience on its videos, and he said, "What's it about?" And I said, "I think it's just a memory of a great man, and a great pianist."
What he was in the past.
And perhaps they had those ideas trapped in their head, but it was awful.
The pianino, radiating history, radiating aspects about composition, radiating aspects about the pianism, the way that things were interpreted, all the history, the incredible characters, all this coming out of that. And that is quite an achievement. Bryce and I had the privilege and the monopoly of taking a little bit of the time. We have an audience, and of course we would be absolutely delighted to hear either your questions, your comments, or your own interpretation. We have another 20 minutes or so. And at the end, we're going to have we will go completely from this is a very English expression, from the sublime to the coldline. We'll have few things to show you. Few things to show you. So if there is any issue at any point,
I fantastic recordings of but what do you think? It's a bit of an unfair question, it's a hard question, but your immense knowledge of Chopin, which artist do you think Chopin would be the most happy to advocate as an interpreter of his music apart from himself? do you think that there is an artist, or is that the point that there are so many different interpretations? But who do you think Chopin, he obviously would not have heard most of it, he's dead.
Yeah.
Who do you think would be a great artist? So he just came down to space, in a sense. But also, I want to ask, personally, both of you actually, it's a hard question as well, what your desire disc, ultimate Chopin recording would be?
Look, I'd answer both in the same way, which is that performance of Richter, a live performance, of course, because Richter's most of them in '79 in Tokyo. That really caught me by surprise, and that I don't sound like Monty Python. We have three things: the element of surprise. But there is that aspect of it in Chopin's playing that I think that everyone talked about that. It was just so surprising, and what's happened, of course, now is that we're so straitjacketed by 150 years of performance history, and so people that can actually turn that on its head, I think, would be something that be true to the spirit of Chopin are those that I'd take to a desert island, and I think I can't possibly say for Chopin.
Many years ago, I was listening to a live performance of the C minor Mazurka, a late one, very dark, neurasthenic sort of utterance from Chopin, from Arthur Rubinstein. And at the end, I thought, I just heard the impossible thing, a perfect performance of Chopin. It is like so big, because I came back to it later, many years later, thinking, I probably think it now exactly the same effect. That would be, and with that performance, the 16th Prelude, played by Corto, there was one particular, we can talk more about them many before, I think, different records of the Chopin Preludes. Six, and he kept coming back. There's one in particular, the 16th Prelude, work of absolutely brilliant fury. The rhythmic force of that is quite extraordinary. That, again, would be on my list. But lots of Rubinstein, lots of Corto. There's one of the F-sharp Nocturne, which Rubinstein always played as an encore. He used to say to the audience, Nocturne by Chopin. It was always the same one, the F-sharp. And every time you heard it, it sounded more miraculous than before. There's all sorts of things one can think of, but those immediately come to mind, particularly that Mazurka from Rubinstein.
The Richter, I'll play you sort of me pretending to be Richter. My favourite is the 13th, and Richter in the '79 record.
And they see a chance we happen to have a
I'll just do the transition, and this is what Richter does in the transition in the 13th. That's enough for me on a desert island, make some coconuts.
Any more points, any more queries, any more impressions?
Where can I buy a book?
That's the best question I've been to.
They're selling it, the lovely people out the front are selling that.
Yeah.
And it's also currently being developed as a feature film. Which is rather exciting. And it's the president of the company used to be Merchant Ivory. So if you're of a certain age, you remember all those films very well from the 90s. It's beautiful. So he's producing it, and it's great. They're going to run the two stories in parallel. So they don't jump between Chopin and the Landowska.
Has it been cast yet?
No, it hasn't.
I'm very curious who's going to play Chopin and Madame Sage or son.
I want Olivia Colman to play.
Or Chopin.
I don't know.
Before we wrap up, we thought long and hard whether bringing some Chopin or Olivia would make any sense after such intellectual discussion. Now, actually, I thought I entertained Paul by a small example of how this could be dangerous. You know the strip cartoon, The Peanuts? One of the characters is an intellectual character, Linus. And they are working with Charlie Brown, which is the main character, to school. Because at school, they bring something to show and talk about. So he says, Linus, what are you bringing? And he says, it is an exit of the Dead Sea Scrolls that puts in a completely new position the role of Jesus in the New Testament, as well as the Essenes sect. And you, Charlie Brown, and Charlie Brown said, I'm bringing a small red fire engine, but I don't think I'm going to show it. So in this respect, again, here are two items personally belonging to Chopin, and we were, well, let's say, given to them via a friend of the Chopin Society, and the stuff belonged, this is a little bit complicated, belonged to the wife of the adopted son of the granddaughter of George Sand. You got it? I have it. Okay, here is, and of course I'll bring them downstairs so you can come and play with them. Here is Chopin's cafetière, where he made his, chocolatier, where he makes his chocolate. And this was the sort of spoon, wooden spoon that was brought in to roll it around and then drip it away. Okay, so here is something that belongs to Chopin. But this is absolutely beautiful. This is a tiny ink drawing at the back of a visiting card of a little dog, and it is signed George Sand. Now, the little dog is the dog that belonged to George Sand, and it was called Marquis. And it was the dog that Chopin observed changing its own tail, and he was inspired to write the 1 minute waltz. I think it's nice. And the last item is gross and grotesque. And not only that, Annabella and I managed to break it several times. It is a cast of Chopin's hand. Now, what is interesting, it is much bigger than you would think it is. Actually, the first thing that Paul did is he put his hand over it. It's not that small. Okay, what I will do is, I'll just put them down here. And on your way in, on your way out, please pay them a visit. And of course, please don't take them away. It goes without saying. All it remains is to say thank you to Paul for flying all the way from Ozeland, where he now happily lives, to share his experience and to share this wonderful, wonderful book. And Bryce, thank you so much for digging into it and digging all the appropriate nice bits. And thank you to Annabella, my lovely wife, whose idea it was.
What exactly?
What exactly does? No. Yeah, because the chocolate was thick, you will put it in and you stir it. Okay.
That's the way.
We bought it in Poland. They sell them everywhere in Poland. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for
Sure.